What's up, guys? This will probably be the last one I do for a while. I just don't have a whole lot of time for this. And the ones we're looking at here, what I wanted to do was find a bunch that I could help out with and then solve them and then start the video. So hopefully there won't be a whole lot of wasted time here. And the reason this one took longer, you'll see that these are like 3 days ago, is because there's a few questions here that I actually didn't know the answer to, but I wanted to find out. So this one here is about invoke mggraph URL formatting, learning about Microsoft Graph. I probably mentioned in one of the previous videos that I'm not familiar with it and I'd like to be. So this guy's question was, he's trying to do 3 things with Graph. He's trying to get all users that have a sign-in of older than 6 months, make sure that they're all guests, and get specific properties. Now, he can do some of those. Like if he does each of these individually, they work, but the less calls you have to Graph, the better, and the less filtering you have to do on the right side, then the faster it'll be. And it looks like he's trying to combine them, but each time it comes up with an error message. So I wanted to figure out how to use Graph myself and see if I can help him out. And he came back with an answer later saying that he was able to combine a couple of them, getting the properties and making sure they were guests. But there's not a whole lot of info on this. So what I did was search around and see if I can find some answers. And what I came up with was this. There's a couple of comments that are very similar. They mention documentation about how the sign-in activity cannot be used with another filter. And it took me a bit, but I found another comment that linked directly to the documentation, which if we look at it here, this is on the user resource type for Microsoft Graph. And here are the properties. And if we go down to, here it is, sign-in activity. Get the last sign-in date and request ID of the sign-in for a given user, read only, returned only on select, supports filter with these operators, but not with any other filterable properties. So this known issue is different from this. Anyway, it's unrelated. But it does mention that you can't combine it with other properties. So I let him know that he's got the option to get all the properties as well as figure out that it's a guest. But I posted this before I noticed his original reply. And I also actually recently posted about my findings. Let me see if I can pull that up. So here is my brief post, and here is a link to all the notes that I have on what I found out about creating an app registration to use with the Graph API, and then how to test it out. There are a few sections that I didn't need. Like I referenced a whole bunch of articles in here. One of them mentioned creating a credential, which I didn't use, and another piece about creating a service principal, which I didn't use. But it's very short if you take out all the unnecessary comments. But you can actually copy and paste this into the editor and like run it as is, and it will create an app. And it's going to log you into Graph first of all, connect to Azure AD. It's going to connect you to Azure AD, and you'll have to sign in. And then it'll build the app and apply the right permissions for reading user accounts. And then it's going to open this URL, and you'll have to click the consent button. I don't know if there's a way to do that programmatically. And then it stops once it's created. And then here is where you can actually run this, and it will use the API value and access token and the client secret that we created up above to request all the users. And then you run this last line to see all the user accounts that I grabbed. So I think it's pretty cool that you can build the app in PowerShell and then test it out right away. Next is permission denied deleting files as admin. Okay. He's just trying to clear up some unused profiles, it looks like, on a workstation. And somebody mentions that if he wants to delete the folder, they can use setACL to take ownership and full control of the folder. That's true, and that probably works. There's also another module called NTFS permission or something like that, which may also work just as well. But I decided to share a link to something that I've used in the past, which is take ownership, and it uses sub-in-acl.exe, and I love that for taking ownership of things. It also uses take own cackles or iCackles. But what this basically does is you provide a folder path. You say if you want everyone to have access or just whoever's running it. Do you want to take ownership of literally this folder only or this file? Or do you want to revoke the permissions instead of apply them? So if you do by default, just take ownership in the folder and that's it, it's going to grant admin rights to this folder and everything inside of it. So if we look at folder, if everyone else here, it's going to do sub-in-acl. Let's start here actually. Download and install sub-in-acl. It will just download the executable from this location and try to install it. And then it will copy it to System32 so that you can use it, because I don't think it comes by default on your computer. But it's really only running these two commands, sub-in-acl file, and you give it the folder path. And you can do / to look at the all the properties of it and grant administrators full. And then it's only one line. And if it's this item only, if not this item only, then it'll do it again for subdirectories. So first it's got to take ownership of the folder that you give it, and then it can take ownership of all the subdirectories. So that's pretty neat. Uninstall application, WMI or CIM. Is there a way to uninstall an application with get-sim instance, or do we still use get-WMI object? What this guy says is accurate. Get-sim instance is the new one. Get-WMI is legacy. Probably avoid it if you can, because get-sim instance is a better version. But I posted a comment here mentioning also what this guy says, which is you don't want to use Win32 product because it gives a bunch of problems. Whenever you check out this link to the get installed apps that I have, you'll even have a giant comment here that I used to just paste on a bunch of people's Reddit posts where they ask about installing or getting the applications. And there's a ton of links here about why you don't want to use Win32 product. And so I just built this very simple thing to get everything in the registry from 32-bit and 64-bit uninstall path in the registry. And it includes the uninstall string. And that's what I mentioned there. But I also have a link here to one of my older posts where I'm trying to find out what are all the common ways to run a command on a remote computer in case you want to uninstall something on a remote computer. And there's a few options here. Invoke command computer name script block is, I guess, probably the standard. But there's some other options like importing a PS session and entering into it, using psexec, using Win32 process on a remote computer name, or invoke WMI method on Win32 process on a remote computer name. And I'm sure other people are listing other options like scheduled tasks, things like that. Logout script help. He's just trying to see if he can specify who to log off. There are a few options that other people have listed here, like force quitting the apps. Another one mentions queue-user, which is what my thing that I posted uses. So if I look here, logoff user, what this does is you give it the name of the person and the server. If you don't give a name, then it's just going to list all the names. So first it does queue-user and the server, and it gets all the users. If you didn't list a name, then it uses out menu. So you don't, if you rewrite this or, I don't know, comment this part out, then you don't need out menu, but I should have linked it in here. It's another function that I have that creates a menu and you can choose from it. And then that way you can just pick it from the menu and then it'll continue and it'll log off that person from that server. However, I want to say somebody said something like this may not work if there's a session but it doesn't have a username. I don't recall. I think it works in most cases, but out menu is this one. It's got a big explanation and it looks complicated, but basically all it does is, and here's some similar functions that also give you a menu that I've found. Some of these may not be available. You might have to use the Wayback Machine to get to them because they're old. But if you do something like this, for example, locations equals a string array and then out menu locations, then it's just going to list, it's going to say choose an option and it's going to list them all out and you can pick one and it'll tell you what it is and choose that. That's all it does. Get-aduser. Okay, he's trying to do get-aduser with the filter and he's saying that there's over 500,000 results. So it's locking up. Somebody mentions a good one, which is breaking it down into first and last name, or by the first letter of the last name, so that you know you're not getting a whole bunch of people at once. But here's my 2 cents. We can try using the ADSI instead of the get-aduser module by using get my ADS object. It's not a great name, but I needed one and I named it that, so that's what it is. But somebody else also made a good mod or a good module as well. What this does is really just a bunch of customization on adsisearcher, and it gets a whole bunch of properties that I care about. Whether it's on a user object or a device object, it just tries to get it anyway. And if it's not there, then it will be empty, and I don't care. And if you wanted to look at the basics of ADSI, it's really just, let's see, just creating the searcher and adding the filter. And the filter is just an LDAP filter. So this is what it looks like. And then you would do, if you wanted to, you can do page size. I think that's almost necessary just to make sure that you're actually getting all the results. I think if it's a large result set and you don't have a page size, then it just stops at a certain number. But if you have a page size, then it will page it and then get all the results. I don't think the page size really matters as long as one exists. I've seen it 50 sometimes. I think 200 is fine. It seems to work. This is just more customization on the filter. Adding a search route if necessary. Properties to load. You don't need this, but I include it just to limit the properties that I get so that I make sure that I get the properties I want and nothing else. This here will get the max password age. But then you just do searcher.findAll and it gives you an array of all the objects that fit that filter. And all this does is convert them into basically strings, and for some of them it converts them into a proper date time, or does some calculations to see when the password was last set because it's not actually doesn't show up properly whenever you do it this way. Different things like that. Or password does not expire. You have to do some binary ANDing on that to get the right value. But that's all it does there. And there was a couple of links in here about other LDAP filter syntax, or if you're trying to do this on a domain that is not your default domain and you need to use different credentials, you might be able to use that, but I haven't really tried it out. GUI console. So this guy's just building a basic script and he wants a GUI for it. He wants to be able to prompt for address, phone, and email with drop-down options and a button. Pretty basic. And somebody does mention, I think it's Posh GUI somewhere. Yeah, somebody mentions Posh GUI, which it has evolved over the years. I used to use it all the time, but now it's paid. The guy who started it, I guess, created it at first because he needed it just like anyone else, and he was, just building it from scratch. And it is a website where you can go to build your own GUI. It's basically a web alternative to using Visual Studio Code. And now you have to log in and buy it and whatever. But they do also list a bunch of GUIs that other people have created that you might be able to use. I guess it's kind of like Pastebin now, where it just has a whole bunch of different stuff that other people are building, and you can sort of browse through them. Featured projects, 365 add user, and you can copy all the information here. But you're going to want to make sure you know what it does before you run it. I wouldn't just go running this on your own environment. But you used to be able to make a project, but now you got to buy it. So I can't use this anymore. But it is useful if you feel like using it. It's just a very basic creating a GUI. But what I did was I found one of my old scripts that was an example of a GUI, and I had a link to it. And again, I had to use archive.org because the original Pastebin is gone. But what it loads up here is really just a basic template of a GUI. And I could probably run this. And that's all it does. It's got a label that asks you for the computer name, text box, and an OK button that's not active unless you have some text in here, and then a cancel button. And it doesn't really do a whole lot. But it is a very basic form here that you can start customizing. And you can change these numbers and play around with them. Like the label. Let's change that to 50 and see what happens. Now it moved. So you can just kind of mess with this and copy and paste this. So if I needed another label, I could do this and put this one at 10. But then you got to change the all the variable names here. And then you got to add it to the form. Where is it? Form.add. What was it? Label 1. So here. There, now there's 2 of them. So you can sort of mess around with it if you have a template like this. So I just let him know that I found the template here. And it looks like I have another link here from a different post where somebody initially asked about it, with some more details if you're interested in that. Turn this reg add to a PS script. So he's got this registry command and he wants to use PowerShell. He wants to do it in a PowerShell way. What's funny is some people do comment about this, which is you can paste a registry file here, and it will turn into PowerShell code. Let me pull one up. So here I've got a registry file that basically assigns PowerShell ISE to be the default program to open all PS1 files. And it looks like if I just paste this in here and check script, it turns it into a PowerShell script. Well, it looks like it's just checking it. It doesn't look like it's actually making any changes. Anyway, something to look at. But if we go back to here, something I listed was, I actually didn't know how to do this because you can just use regadd inside PowerShell. So when he asked to do this in a PowerShell way, like what you have is sufficient right there. You can just copy and paste that into PowerShell. But somebody does mention you can use HKLM as a drive. So I tried to figure out the PowerShell way to do this, and we do new item, and we give it the path and the name, which is the key name or the folder name that you're going to create, but it's going to give you an error if it already exists. This one's going to give you an error if the path already exists. So after you create the folder or key, then we're going to create an item inside of it called format database with a value of 1 and it's dword or string. And that's when you're creating a new one. But if it already exists and it gives you an error, then you can set the item property to change it. And then this will check it, get item property. So if you really want to use PowerShell, that's how you do it. Is there a way to make the Azure AD modules command run automatically without needing to sign in and connect to Azure AD? Okay. This is once again back to, I want to say graph. The comment I left here is this was a helpful video for me. This was the one I used to set up the graph stuff that you saw before. I don't know if I necessarily know how to do exactly what he's asking, but here's a link to another comment here where it looks like somebody's doing that, where they have an app ID and a tenant ID and a password, PS credential, and they can connect to AZ account using the credential of their app ID, and it's a service principal, and that's connecting to AZ account or Azure AD, and then they can use it. So if you follow these links, this video and this article, then maybe that'll get you in the right direction. And somebody also says you can create a service principal. So I think I probably need to do a little bit more research on how that works out. But I think this is a step in the right direction. Okay. This one was interesting. Needing to run an exe as admin from a non-admin account. And the top comment by a wide margin is advice to write a script that the user can run as a non-admin, that all it does is writes a custom Windows event that is linked to a trigger start scheduled task that then performs an action as an admin with admin rights. Super easy to set up and requires no third-party tools. But there's not really an example here. So I looked into it to see if I could figure out how to do that. Looks like somebody else also has different example. There's different suggestions, but I liked that one. So I wanted to try and figure that out. A few people mentioned creating a scheduled task to run as admin, so here's my go at a template for it. Run as admin to create the task. That's this whole piece right here. So new scheduled task setting set so that you can allow the task to start if you're on batteries, because I use a laptop. This is a link to the article where I got most of this information. Actually, no, it's not. This is a link to this article. Well, shoot, I guess I don't have a link to an article on this one. But then you need to do task setting set. Nope, already talked about that. Then you need to do schedule task action. And that's just telling it execute PowerShell with this argument. And all I did here in this test was get the date and say event triggered and just push that into a text file. That's it. And append to a text file. And then what we had to do here is create a task event trigger so that we could apply the event trigger itself, which is this. Here's a query. And I got this query from just going into the task and creating it manually, and then you can copy it out of there. We're going to the application log, and I created a new provider called PWSH, and I didn't specify an event ID, so this will trigger on any event that shows up in that log. And it's enabled, and then we create the scheduled task. I just named it event log test 2 with a description of test, runs as a user system. I didn't really have the ability to test if you could run this as admin by triggering the event as a non-admin. That's just not something I set up to test out, but I assume that this would work. So if any of you try this and it doesn't work, please let me know and I'll see if I can fix it. And then the action is going to be what we specified up here. Settings is going to be the batteries thing. The trigger is going to be the query force. And then you got to run this piece as admin to create the new event log. In application is going to be PWSH. And have the user run this to create the event and thus trigger the task. Write event log, application, source PWSH. You can specify an event ID. It's an information type. And then you just create a message here. And you can do this to get all the logs from the log that we created. And as soon as this executes, then the event is triggered, and this file now exists. It's not going to create this folder, so that folder has to already exist, but you get the idea. And I thought that was pretty neat. And finally, looking for a command for Exchange Online to know how many emails a user sends in a month. This one is tricky because message trace only goes up to 10 days. And then if you use, it looks like start-historicalsearch and get-historicalsearch, then it will create basically a task in Exchange Online to retrieve the emails, and that usually takes a while. But if you can do like the last 7 days, then you can retrieve those almost immediately, but that's not what he wants to do. He wants to check over the past month. So I said, according to this, you can look at these two. So what do we got here? Shoot, it's not highlighted. There was a highlight somewhere in here. Historical. Here it is. To search for message data that is greater than 10 days old, use the start-historicalsearch and get-historicalsearch commandlets. But what's weird is when you look over to the left, you see start-historicalsearch, but you don't see get-historicalsearch. So I had to find that somewhere else. Anyway, here's start-historicalsearch, and has a description of how it's supposed to work. And then here's get-historicalsearch in a different section here, in reporting, I guess. That gives you an example of how to retrieve the job ID. I didn't test these out, but it looked like these would be what he might need to do. So maybe I can test these out and see if those actually work the way I think they might. But that's it. hopefully there was some useful stuff in here, and see you guys next time. Peace.